to is what we call the sound of the slammer. Take a look at this. Now this sound orchestrated the dance between the inmates and the guards as they move through their daily routine. It is the sound of nearly 3,000 pounds of metal being rolled back and forth. It is also, if you think about it, the voice of the prison authority. What do you think that this voice that we call the sound of the slammer, what was this voice saying to the convicts who are incarcerated? Abandon all hope? Now, for inmate Robert Luke, he described it as the sound of doom and finality. It was the sound of being entombed. Now, on the other hand, what was the sound of the slammer? What was it saying to the officers who worked here? Well, if they were open like this, I think it would be the sound of caution. The inmates were leaving their cells, always the risk of potential violence when this occurs. Now, when it was closed down at night, though, by the way, did anybody know when the inmates were finally locked away in their cells? Any ideas? Earlier.
Today.
Earlier.
7.
Earlier.
6:30.
5?
Close.
4:30.
4:30. That's exactly right. 14 hours in these cells. They wouldn't get out until 6:30. So you can imagine sort of the sense of relief that the officers must have felt when they finally closed down the cell doors at 6:30 and the inmates were safely locked away in their cell that the officers had over the inmates. It also, I believe, gave a certain measure of relief to both inmate and guard. I think that there is a comfort to be gained in following a familiar routine, especially in the highly charged and potentially volatile atmosphere of a maximum security prison. Now, the cost of the security of routine is, of course, complete loss of freedom for the inmates. But to a large extent, it was true for the officers. They lost a certain degree of freedom because it really was the warden who set the protocol that all the officers had to follow. First, a little background. When the Federal Bureau of Prisons took over Alcatraz from the military in the early 1930s, they installed extra security measures, such as erecting 6 guard towers and unrolling yards of barbed wire and chain link fencing to secure what they saw was the most dangerous criminals in America at that time. Now, they also decided to replace the old flat iron barred doors that you can still see today on A block. That's at the beginning of your audio tour. If you look closely, that cell block looks different. They decided to replace those old doors, those flat iron doors, with a new set of doors that could only be controlled by gang boxes or control boxes located at the end of each and every aisle. That meant that no longer would an officer have to stand in front of a cell with his key to let the inmate out. He could do so by the relative safety at the end of each aisle. So, the Federal Bureau of Prisons contracted Stewart Iron Works of Cincinnati, Ohio, to build these doors. And besides this remote system of opening and closing the doors, they also installed a new kind of bars, tool-proof steel. And with these solid carbon steel interiors, it was almost impossible to cut through. On the last escape attempt from Alcatraz, a pair of inmates did exactly that. So the operation of these cell doors, it's really relatively simple. It's a mechanical exercise. It's the interaction of 3 different levers. So I'm going to close these up, and we're going to move on to the next part of the demonstration. This is the sound of the clutch. You've heard it before. I'm going to move it up to door number 6, clutching door number 6, moving up to door number 8, clutching door number 8. Okay, now I've clutched 3 alternate doors, and hopefully they will abide. And then what finally actually moves the doors is the 3rd lever, which is called the hammer. Well, they did open up tonight. That's always good news. Okay, so this operation is strictly mechanical. And why do you think the prison elected to use a mechanical system over an electric one? Any ideas?
Power failures.
Power failures. It does become obvious, doesn't it? I mean, there would be always, with an electrical system, you always have the danger of either locking inmates into their cells, you can't get them out, or outside. Either situation would be kind of a dangerous kind of situation. And I will tell you, in the 29 years that Alcatraz operated as a federal penitentiary, these doors proved to be pretty reliable, although not as much these days. So, to move on to the second part of this presentation, I would like you to imagine that you are an inmate here on Alcatraz Island. Now, your day begins at 6:30 in the morning with the rising bell. Let's quickly close these doors up, otherwise it won't make any sense. 1 second. 6 or 8. 6 and 4. All right.
8's open.
8 is not open. All right, let me see if I can do this again. Thank you. Always nice to do this in front of visitors. As I said, well, there are issues with these doors, let me tell you. All right. At this point, officers walk down the aisles here with clipboards, and they check to see that each inmate is where he's supposed to be. Now the officers transmits this inmate count to the lieutenant who's sitting down here at this desk. Hello, Lieutenant. Lieutenant Robert. Okay. Now, Lieutenant Robert will give the signal up to the officer in the gun gallery. Lieutenant Robert. Oh, thank you. There we go. Now, the officer in the gun gallery will lower the key that opens up the gang boxes that compose the door. Then at 7 o'clock, the first whistle is blown, and the doors, hopefully, will be racked open. Life is good. All right. So you've been standing at attention in front of the cell door during the inmate count. When you hear the doors racked open, you are to step out of your cell in unison with all the other men in your line, and then you turn to face the dining hall. With the second whistle, you are to step closer to the man before you, closest to the dining hall. And then with the third whistle, you are to march signal file into the dining hall. Now remember, all your movements are being watched by officers with rifles stationed at either gun gallery. Now this procedure generally begins in the bottom floor called the flats, and it proceeds upward until all of B and C block have been processed into the dining hall. You are given 20 minutes to eat your breakfast. Now if you happen to be the first inmates to sit down to have your breakfast, the very last inmates are filing in when you are given the signal to rise and return to your cell. So this procession of inmates really never stops. Inmates are in constant motion. They're going in, they're coming out. And why do you think it was so important for the officers to maintain such tight control and to conduct this whole procedure, I mean, just feeding the inmates into like a military exercise? Why was it crucial for them to be so rigid?
To keep control.
Routine.
To keep control. That's what prison is all about. It's all about control at any moment. And if you know anything about prison history, you know where riots frequently occur is inside the dining hall itself. Now I'd like you to imagine this. What is your morning routine? What do you do when you first get up? Now personally, I receive no small measure of satisfaction. I get up about the same time every morning. I sit down and have my breakfast and make myself a cup of coffee, which I really look forward to, and then I sit down and I usually read, sometimes go on the computer, but I like to read with a cup of coffee. Now your morning ritual, of course, will be different from mine, but I would gather that you get some measure of comfort following a familiar routine. Now the difference between us and the inmates and officers here on Alcatraz is that we have control over what our routines will be. We do not have the sound of the slammer dictating our steps. And personally, I don't need this sound to tell me when to have my morning coffee. Now I'd like to thank you for coming out and joining us here on Alcatraz Island for the night tour. We hope you enjoyed yourself here. And we're going to be closing down the island now. And so it would help us if you wouldn't mind all filing into the dining hall and going down the stairs. The boat will be coming in about 20 minutes. We're going to be on the same boat. You're going to go back. We're not staying here. So anyhow, thanks for coming out and thanks for coming.